Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Nat Perry. I'm Head of Communications at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. This is the press conference for the International Election Observation Mission to the parliamentary elections that took place here in Moldova yesterday. So this mission has been a joint endeavor of several institutions working together who are all represented here on the panel. We have Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, European Parliament, and the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. We'll start with George Saratelli, who's been appointed as the Special Coordinator of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission. Mr. Saratelli, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nat. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to see all of you. It's almost full house here. That's good. So, my name is George Saratelli, as already was announced. I'm a member of Parliament from Georgia. I'm President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and the Coordinator of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission for Moldovan Parliamentary Elections. As a Special Coordinator, I'm pleased to report on behalf of more than 300 observers who work together for this mission. The deployment of such a large and strong team of parliamentarians and experts reflects the importance that we attached to these elections and the democratic developments in Moldova. Let me first characterize our findings in a few sentences. The 24th February 2019 parliamentary elections were competitive and fundamental rights were generally respected. The campaign took place against the backdrop of disaffection with public institutions and was tainted by allegations of pressure of public employees, strong indications of vote buying, and the misuse of state resources. Control and ownership of the media by political actors limited the range of viewpoints presented to voters. Most aspects of the elections were administered in a professional and transparent manner. Voting was assessed positively, but the electoral bodies faced additional difficulties implementing aspects of the new electoral system and the simultaneous holding the referendum. As you know, these were the first elections held under Moldova's newly introduced mixed electoral system, which was adopted through a process that lacked inclusive public debate or consultation. We found that the legal framework generally provides an adequate basis for conducting democratic elections, although recent amendments partially address some previous recommendations. Important issues remain unanswered. This includes the application of the provisions of the misuse of administrative resources, the loopholes concerning the use of charities to finance campaigns, and insufficient rules to address media concentration. For the most part, technical aspects of the election were managed professionally. Election administration bodies held regular sessions that were open to observers and the media. Women were well represented in all levels of the election administration. So election day proceeded without major incidents. There was large-scale busing of voters from Transnistria and allegations that some of them were paid to vote. I myself observed voting in Chisinau and in the countryside, including near Transnistria. We note in our parliamentary report that CEC changed the location of 31 out of the 47 polling stations set up for Transnistrian voters, citing security considerations. This and the lack of transparency in how polling stations were allocated also for voters abroad contributed to a perception that these decisions were made for some political reasons. Nevertheless, the fact that people seized on this opportunity to express their voice indicates an interest in having say in the policies and the policies that affect their daily lives. This echoes what is being done in the Transnistrian settlement process. We have seen some tangible progress in resolving this conflict, and I hope that these elections, and it should help building trust and more inclusive society, and I hope that this momentum continues. In conclusion, this was an active, hard-fought and quite polarized campaign in generally well-run elections. It is no secret that there is overall disappointment among citizens in political processes and institutions here. And now, after all, I call on my newly elected parliamentary colleagues to not deliver on promises, address the problems we identified, and meet the expectations of the people of Moldova. I appreciate the very good cooperation we have enjoyed with our partners from the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, the European Parliament, my colleagues from OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and of course, ODIHR. Their competence and expertise were a valuable assets for our joint effort. We appreciate also the openness and welcoming attitude of the authorities in this electoral period. And I'd like to also want to thank all the local experts and political actors who took the time to talk to us in recent days during our briefings and to give a clear overall picture of the situation in Moldova. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serratelli. Now we'll hear from Claude Cairn, who's a member of the French Senate and has led the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe's delegation. Mr. Cairn.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has observed all elections in Moldova since 1994. We were invited by the authorities of this country to observe the elections because Moldova is under the monitoring procedure with the Parliamentary Assembly and has the commitment to invite our Assembly to observe elections. Therefore, I would like to thank the authorities of the country for having invited our organization to observe the elections and for their spirit of cooperation. Our delegation was composed of 20 members of the Assembly, representing 5 political groups and 12 member states. The delegation was accompanied by the legal experts of the Council of Europe's Venice Commission. I share the preliminary conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission presented by my colleague George Sterretelli, President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. Yesterday, we sent 13 teams of observers to Chisinau and surrounding areas, as well as in the regions. Our observers noted that the voting day was generally well organized. But you know very well that elections are not limited to the election day only. These include the legal framework and the election campaign. As for the legal framework, the new electoral system regrettably confirmed the main concerns raised by the Venice Commission, in particular the lack of effective mechanism to prevent undue influence by wealthy business people, combined with a poor system of supervision of party and candidate funding and inadequate sanctions. Concerning the election campaign, our delegation noted, among other things, widespread cases of misuse of administrative resources, involvement of foundations affiliated with political parties, allegations of vote buying, and cases of pressure on public employers. These problems were unfortunately also observed during previous elections by our Assembly. I will present my final report on the observation of these parliamentary elections on 8 April 2019 in Strasbourg during the Assembly's session. Our delegation invited the authorities of Moldova to continue their close cooperation with the Parliamentary Assembly and the Venice Commission to address the shortcomings identified during the elections. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for those remarks, and we'll now hear from Kari Henriksen, who is a member of the Norwegian Parliament and has led the OSCE PA's delegation.
Thank you so much. My fellow observers and I fully agree with the assessment announced by George Tertelli, and thank him and my other colleagues here for the excellent cooperation. I led a delegation of 42 OSCE observers. On Sunday, our members have been deployed throughout the country and observed election day proceedings in various locations and saw how the people of Moldova cast their votes. It is important to remember that an election is about the people. People must have the right to stand for election as well as to express their political preferences freely and with full understanding of the process, regardless of sex, age, social status, and ethnicity. In an inclusive process, the Central Election Commission registered all 14 parties on one block that submitted national lists. In single-member constituency, an average of more than 6 candidates competed for each seat. In total, almost 1,000 candidates stood for election. However, we note that the requirements for collecting supporting signatures were overly formal and the process of signatures verification was inconsistent, presenting unreasonable obstacles to potential candidates. In a positive step, the national constituency, all parties complied with new regulation having 40% of women candidates in their lists. About 1/5 of single-member constituency candidates were women. However, the good intention of the law found poor implementation in reality when parties did not put many women in the top spots of their national-wide lists. As a member of Parliament myself, I feel strongly that Parliament should generally be a reflection of the population if it is to be truly representative. That is why I am disappointed that a combination of systematic changes and decisions by political parties will likely result in very low representation of women in the next Parliament. We have to then ask, how representative can the Parliament be if it doesn't reflect the majority of the population? Women demonstrated their willingness to actively participate in Moldova's political process, and this must be further encouraged. The prominent role that women play in running elections was on display yesterday in polling stations across the country. Considering that women are the majority of the population, political leaders must assume their responsibility to step up and effectively translate this into equal political power and representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henriksen. And now we'll hear from Rebecca Harms, who has led the European Parliament's delegation of observers.
The delegation of the European Parliament was very pleased to have been present as observers at these parliamentary elections in the Republic of Moldova. For us, this is a country with which the European Union has a deep relationship, founded on the Eastern Partnership and the EU-Moldova Association Agreement, which entered into force in 2016. This agreement is based on common values, including respect for democratic principles, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. This is a relationship which we want to develop and strengthen. However, there has been a deterioration of democratic standards as a result of recent decisions by the Moldovan authorities, including the adoption of the July 2017 electoral reform. This was adopted despite the negative recommendations of our ODIHR and Venice Commission friends. Another issue of concern was the invalidation of the results of the early mayoral elections in Chisinau. These developments have led the EU to suspend the disbursement of its macro-financial assistance to Moldova. The European Parliament has stated that any future disbursement, which I find very necessary, of this assistance should be on the condition that these parliamentary elections are conducted in line with internationally recognized standards. The concerns raised by the European Parliament in its past resolutions are even more important now in the light of these elections, which are of huge importance to the future of the EU-Moldova relationship. Our delegation subscribes fully to the statement of preliminary findings and conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission, and I would like to express our thanks to Mr. Matthias Eorsi, the head of the OSZE ODIHR mission, and his team for very excellent support and cooperation, and also to the heads of all parliamentary delegations and their colleagues. I would also like to thank EU Ambassador Michalko for his huge assistance to us during the last days. During this election day, our delegation observed the vote and the count in and around Chisinau, Anieni Noi and Comrat, and also observed in the region of Dubasari. Our conclusions echo those of the other observers. However, I would like to focus on some specific issues. Firstly, we observed the large-scale organized movement of voters that took place by bus from Transnistria to polling stations. This situation contrasted starkly with the difficulties experienced by members of the substantial Moldovan diaspora to vote in the elections because of the decision of the Constitutional Court to end the practice of allowing Moldovans abroad to vote with expired passports. A decision which came less than 6 weeks before the election, thus preventing many to obtain new passports in time. At the same time, they were not allowed to vote with their IDs, unlike the voters in country. The European Parliament delegation was also struck by the lack of consistency between polling stations in the treatment of the ballots for the referendum. Other concerns that we had include such issues as the inadequacy of the secrecy of voting in polling stations. We were impressed by the vital role played by women in the management of the electoral process, and as a woman in politics, I echo now a bit what my colleague Kari said. It is a matter of regret that a relatively small number of women were in the top 10 positions on the national lists. Turning to another concern that is also covered in the preliminary statement, the European Parliament delegation regrets that the elections have taken place against a backdrop of decreased public trust in state institutions. This distrust has been deepened by the introduction of the new electoral system, which took place with a lack of inclusive public consultations. We therefore call on all stakeholders to show political maturity and responsibility and to give priority in the country's interests. No one else can do this, and it is the only way to restore the trust of the people of Moldova and renew their faith in the country's future. The European Parliament and the European Union in general will closely follow post-electoral developments in Moldova, and what takes place here in the coming weeks and months will have a major impact on the future of our, hopefully, and I'm very honest in this, I hope it very much, future of our good relations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Harms. And last but not least, we'll hear from Matthias Iorsi, head of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights Mission.
First of all, warm thanks for your very kind words from each of you, and let me also tell you that it was a wonderful working relationship between the parliamentary assemblies who came to observe this election and ODIHR, and thank you for George Teratelli, president of the OSCE-PA, who, by the way, is a good friend of mine for so many years, and all of his colleagues for this great cooperation. ODIHR, with its 13-member core team and 28-member long-term observers, arrived to Moldova on middle January. So we have been observing the pre-electoral environment and the campaign since then. At a later point, we were joined by as many as 343 short-term observers. Now, each of these numbers, core team, long-term observers, short-term observers, each of these numbers are higher than we requested or expected from participating states. That shows an exceptionally high interest by the international community in this election. The timing, the size, and the professionality of the mission permit me to say that both Moldovan citizens and the international community hoped that the yesterday parliamentary election will reinforce public confidence in democratic institutions of Moldova. Now, despite all of the shortcomings, you heard from my colleagues, with which I agree, it was great to see that the elections offered voters a wide choice of political alternatives. The campaign was competitive and fundamental rights were respected. Now, the revision of the electoral system and the combination of the election with referenda regrettably rather confused than empowered citizens to make profound choices. Reports of pressure on public employees, vote buying, misuse of state resources, high concentration of media ownership will all have to be addressed in the future to increase public confidence in Moldovan elections. We hope that authorities will follow up on the recommendations contained in our final report on these elections. Having said that, the election held yesterday provides a solid foundation to regain confidence. This is an opportunity that needs to go hand in hand with responsibility. It is crucial that those elected will assume offices in due time and represent citizens. The respect of the wish of the people expressed in the ballots and joint efforts to form an effective government are both imperative. Politicians now must deliver and live up to expectations connected to this election in Moldova. Our final report will be published approximately 2 months from now. It will be published on the website of ODIHR, and I kindly encourage representatives of the media, members of the diplomatic community, but all Moldovan citizens to visit our website, download and study our report, because we shall be back to have a follow-up dialogue with the Moldovan authorities and political actors to see it together how, based on our recommendations, Moldova will be able to conduct better elections. Thank you very much, and as always, we are ready for questions.
Thank you very much for those remarks. We now have some time for questions from journalists. I believe we have some microphones in the room on the side here. If you would please identify yourself and the media outlet that you represent. Yes.
Hello, thank you for your report. So the pro-European opposition...
I'm sorry, could you just give your name and the media outlet, please?
Sure. Felicia Crețu, TVA channel. The pro-European opposition announced today, and they asked respectfully the international missions of observers to not recognize the elections just yet, in light of all the infringements that you mentioned as well, such as the misuse of state resources, the mass transportation of voters from the left bank of the Dniester. So what would be your response to to what they have asked?
Yes, please.
We heard these statements, and this is important to underscore and underline that it is not up to the international community and its institutions to legitimize elections as it was requested. The legitimacy of the elections are twofold. One is legal. It is up to the constitutional system of Moldova, who will finally legally approve or not approve the elections. And there's a political legitimacy that is fully up to the citizens of Moldova. We are here to observe and then to report, but legitimacy is not our business.
Mr. Sertelli.
Just 2 words to add what my dear colleague Matthias George said. Of course, in our report, we very clearly stated about all the shortcomings that we observed, reported, allegations, proved facts, but according legitimacy, of course, we're not certifying, let's say, elections here. I myself, I was in 2 polling stations, one in Košice and one in Dubasna, am I right? And I saw, quite, let's say, unpleasant picture. At one station, it was a little bit maybe better than another one, but all was described by observers that queues, a lot of people, and sometimes unorganized process. That's a fact, but it should be very thoroughly, let's say, investigated, assessed by the authorities, and there are legal means to decide over that. So that's our answer to this question. And thank you, Matthias, to having very precise answer.
Good afternoon. My name is Mikhail Yegikov. I represent TASS agency, and my question will be addressed to each of you, whoever wants to answer it. I'd like you to compare these elections to the previous elections of 2014, whether it was more transparent, more democratic, and so on.
Mr. Aorsi, perhaps?
I was not here for that election.
Can I ask you to compare our previous reports with the current report? We are not comparing elections, we are analyzing current elections, but since Moldova became independent, ODIHR was here observed elections and reported, and it's up to the whole world to look and to compare our reports, and you are welcome to do so.
I understand this, and I meant that is there any progress in the process of holding the elections in the country and everything that goes with it? That's what I mean.
As you will see, and as always, at certain fields there are progresses, not everywhere. This would be totally wrong on my side to start to pinpoint where we saw progress and where we did not, but again, I hope it will be very, very clearly readable from our report. When I, in my preliminary statement, addressed the issue that the public confidence faced a very serious challenge in this country, and the current election provides a solid basis to improve the public confidence, I think that with this, I also answered your question.
Thank you for that question. Do we have any additional questions at this time?
Ladies and gentlemen, there is not a question but a small announcement on behalf of ARI. Please, after this press conference, stay seated or serve a coffee break until we change your banners, and International Republican Institute is going to release its press statement on the election observation. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd just like to remind everyone that the statement and press release are available at the back of the room. And as Mr. Iorsi said, in 2 months or so, the final report should be coming out. So please keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much to all of you.